The ink on the custody papers had barely dried when the whisper started spreading through royal corridors and private phone calls like a spark through dry leaves. The kind of whisper that makes people stop mid-sentence, lean closer, and ask the same question in a lowered voice. Wait, what exactly? Did Harry just reveal about Meghan? Because according to people who claim to know what was said behind those closed legal doors, the story did not end with the custody agreement. In fact, that signature may have triggered something far more explosive than anyone expected, because almost immediately after the deal was finalized, Harry allegedly made a revelation that sent shockwaves through both royal insiders and the media world. He believed Meghan had been quietly recording private conversations for years. Not interviews, not public discussions, private moments. Conversations that were never meant to leave the room. And if that claim is even partially true, then the entire saga of the Sussex marriage suddenly looks very different. The atmosphere surrounding the custody settlement had already been tense beyond anything the palace had experienced in decades. According to insiders who followed the situation closely, the agreement itself was massive, a sweeping legal structure drafted in secrecy and finalized after weeks of intense negotiations that redefined finances, public conduct rules, and even the legal framework around the children's identities. But beneath the legal language and formal signature, something else had been happening, something emotional, personal, and deeply unsettling, because Harry had reportedly begun revisiting moments from the past, small details, strange pauses in conversations, the way certain private discussions later appeared to echo in interviews, documentaries, or public narratives in ways that suddenly felt too precise to be coincidence. At first, those suspicions were apparently dismissed as stress. Friends close to him said that the months leading up to the settlement had been brutal. His life was unraveling in slow motion. His relationship with the royal family had been strained for years. Financial pressures were mounting. Public scrutiny was relentless. Anyone in that position might start questioning everything. But then came the moment that insiders claim changed the entire tone of the conversation. During one of the final discussions surrounding the custody settlement, a tense exchange that involved lawyers, advisors, and multiple confidentiality clauses, Harry reportedly made a statement that froze the room. He said he believed some of his most private conversations had been recorded. The allegation landed like a thunderclap, because this was not just about marital trust anymore. This was about evidence, documentation, potential leverage, and suddenly people started remembering things. Moments when Meghan appeared to reference private discussions with uncanny precision, stories that emerged in public interviews that seemed to mirror arguments that had supposedly happened in private spaces, narrative details that were strangely specific, almost as if someone had been able to replay those conversations later. For years, those details had simply been viewed as storytelling, but now, according to whispers spreading among insiders, they were being reconsidered. Was it memory or something else? The idea that recordings might exist introduces an entirely different layer to a story that was already one of the most dramatic royal sagas in modern history. Because if someone had been documenting private conversations all along, then those recordings could theoretically contain material that reshapes the entire public narrative. And that possibility alone has reportedly made several people within royal circles extremely uneasy. Think about it. The Sussex years have already produced memoirs, documentaries, podcasts, interviews, and countless media appearances. But imagine if behind the scenes there were hours, maybe hundreds of hours of raw conversations captured in real time. Arguments, strategy discussions, emotional breakdowns, disagreements about the royal family, private comments about future plans. If recordings like that existed, they would be explosive. And that is precisely why Harry's alleged remark after the custody settlement caused such a stir. Because he was not simply venting frustration. According to people who claim to have heard the account secondhand, he was suggesting that some of those recordings might have been used to shape the narrative that eventually reached the public, which raises another uncomfortable question. If recordings existed, when were they made? Early in the marriage? During the tense period before the couple stepped back from royal duties, or later during the years when their media projects were expanding and their public storytelling was becoming a global spectacle? Timeline matters a lot, because if those recordings date back to the early years of the relationship, it would mean that some of the most intimate moments of the Sussex marriage were potentially being documented long before the public ever heard their version of events. And that possibility has triggered a quiet wave of speculation among commentators who have followed the saga from the beginning. Some say the idea idea sounds far-fetched, others say it would actually explain a great deal, especially when you look at how detailed certain public stories have been over the years. But here is where the story becomes even more complicated, because there has been no public confirmation of any recordings, no leaked audio, no verified documentation, just a growing cloud of speculation fueled by Harry's alleged comment and the extraordinary tension surrounding the custody agreement. And yet, inside royal circles, the rumor refuses to die. People keep asking the same question. If the recordings exist, where are they? Are they stored somewhere? Have they already been used in ways the public doesn't fully understand? Or are they simply a suspicion born from the emotional wreckage of a relationship that collapsed under the weight of global attention? For now, nobody outside the inner legal team seems to know the answer. But one thing is clear. The custody settlement did not close the book on the Sussex saga. If anything, it may have opened an entirely new chapter, one that shifts the focus away from royal protocol and legal frameworks and towards something far more personal, the hidden dynamics inside a marriage that captivated the world. Because the most unsettling possibility is not just that private conversations might have been recorded, it is that those recordings, if they exist, could still surface. And if that day ever comes, the story the world thought it knew might suddenly sound very different. The moment that rumor escaped the room, it did not travel slowly. It moved through the invisible network that always exists around royal drama. Lawyers talking to journalists off the record, former palace aides quietly sharing details with trusted commentators, media producers chasing whispers that might become headlines by morning. Within hours, the story had begun to mutate into something larger, darker, and far more intriguing than anyone expected. Because the question was no longer simply whether Meghan had recorded private conversations. The question had become far more unsettling. What exactly might be on those recordings? People who follow royal controversies know how carefully narratives are constructed around this family. Every public statement is measured, every interview prepared, every word scrutinized for meaning. But raw conversations are different. Raw conversations contain things that polished statements never do. Frustration, doubt, strategy, emotion, and sometimes truths that were never meant to leave the room. If recordings of those moments truly exist, they would represent something unprecedented in modern royal history. And that possibility is precisely what has made insiders increasingly uneasy. Because imagine what those recordings could capture. Imagine Harry speaking freely about his family during moments of anger or heartbreak. Imagine Meghan discussing her plans for life outside the royal system while the cameras of the world were still focused on palace appearances and public smiles. Imagine the strategic conversations about documentaries, interviews, and public storytelling, not the polished explanations that reach Netflix or the press, but the real discussions that happened before those decisions were ever announced. That is the kind of material that could rewrite the entire timeline. According to whispers circulating among commentators who track royal affairs closely, Harry's alleged revelation came during a moment when the pressure of the custody agreement had reached its breaking point. The legal settlement itself had already been described as massive and deeply complex, a sweeping agreement that covered finances, guardianship structures, media restrictions, and long-term protections around the children's identities. But beyond the paperwork, something personal had clearly shifted inside Harry. Because once the legal fight ended, the emotional reality began to settle in. The life he had fought to build outside the royal institution was collapsing piece by piece. Financial pressures had become impossible to ignore. Media partnerships were dissolving. The carefully constructed image of a powerful global brand was showing cracks. And now, with the custody settlement finalized, Harry was reportedly confronting the possibility that the story he had lived might not be the same story the world had been told. That realization can do strange things to a person. People start re-examining memories, conversations, little moments that seemed insignificant at the time. The way someone held a phone during an argument. The way certain phrases from private discussions later appeared almost word for word in public interviews. At first, those connections might feel like coincidence. But once doubt enters the picture, coincidence starts to look different. Suddenly, every moment becomes suspicious. That is the psychological storm insiders say Harry was navigating in the days after the custody agreement. Friends who spoke with him during that period reportedly noticed a pattern. He was revisiting the past constantly, replaying conversations in his mind, questioning whether certain details had been remembered too perfectly. And then there was the larger question hanging over everything. If recordings existed, who controlled them? Because whoever controls a recording controls the narrative that can emerge from it. Audio does not behave like memory. It does not soften with time or bend to interpretation. A recording freezes a moment exactly as it happened. Every word, every pause, every emotion captured permanently. In a world where reputation and public perception are everything, that kind of evidence carries enormous power. Power that could be used in many ways. Some observers believe the alleged recordings might have been intended for future storytelling projects, raw material for documentaries, books, or podcasts that would present the couple's private experiences in their own voices. Others believe the recordings could have been a form of personal protection, a way of documenting events in case accusations ever surfaced. But there are also those who see a darker possibility, because if recordings captured private disagreements or sensitive conversations about the royal family, they could become leverage, the kind of leverage that turns personal conflict into global spectacle. And that is where the tension surrounding Harry's alleged claim becomes truly explosive, because it suggests that the most dramatic chapter of this saga may not have happened in public interviews or media deals. It may have been unfolding quietly behind closed doors the entire time, hidden inside private conversations that were never supposed to be heard by anyone else. For the palace, even the possibility of such recordings would be deeply unsettling. The monarchy has survived centuries of scandals precisely because it controls information carefully. Stories emerge slowly, filtered through official channels and managed disclosures, but recordings break that system. Recordings bypass the filters. They speak directly, and if such material ever surfaced, the consequences could ripple far beyond the Sussex story itself. Because it would force the public to confront something uncomfortable, how much of the royal drama we have watched over the past decade was genuine conflict, and how much of it may have been shaped by narrative strategy. For now, however, the truth remains locked behind layers of speculation. No recordings have appeared, no confirmed evidence has surfaced, just whispers, questions, and a growing sense that the story may still be unfinished. The Sussex saga has always unfolded in dramatic chapters. The fairy tale wedding, the sudden departure from royal life, the explosive interviews, the best-selling memoir, the media empire that rose and then faltered. Each stage seemed like a final act, a moment when the drama would finally settle. But it never did. And now, with the custody agreement signed and Harry allegedly questioning whether his private conversations were documented all along, the narrative has shifted once again. Because if there truly are recordings somewhere, hidden, archived, waiting, then the next chapter of this story could be more explosive than anything that has come before. And the most unsettling part? The people closest to the situation reportedly believe the world has not heard the last of it.